The moment you stop explaining your boundaries is the moment you realize who was never listening. There is a moment most people don't recognize right away. A moment when you realize that the reason you keep explaining yourself has very little to do with clarity and everything to do with fear. Fear that if you don't soften your words enough, someone will leave. Fear that if you don't give reasons, your no will sound unkind. Fear that setting a boundary without a story attached will make you look cold, difficult, or ungrateful. So you explain, you over-explain, you rehearse your reasons in your head before you even speak. You pile context on top of context, hoping that if they understand enough, they won't be upset. Hoping that if you make it make sense, you'll still be accepted. But here's the quiet truth most of us were never taught. When a boundary needs excessive explanation, it's usually because somewhere along the way, love felt conditional. You learned often very early that being understood was safer than being firm, that being agreeable kept the peace. That if you could just say it the right way, you wouldn't be abandoned, criticized, or punished emotionally. So explaining became a survival skill, not a weakness, not a flaw, a strategy. The problem is survival strategies don't always age well. What once protected you can slowly start to drain you, because every explanation carries an unspoken question underneath it. Is this okay? Am I still okay if I say this? And that question is exhausting. Over time, you may notice a pattern. The more you explain, the less satisfied you feel. The more words you use, the smaller you feel inside. You leave conversations replaying everything you said, wondering if you said too much or somehow still not enough. You mistake anxiety for empathy. You confuse self-abandonment with kindness. But boundaries were never meant to be arguments. They were meant to be statements of self-respect. Awareness begins when you notice why the explaining starts, not after the conversation during it. When your chest tightens, when your voice softens unnecessarily, when you feel the urge to justify a simple need, that's not intuition telling you're wrong. That's an old fear asking to be reassured. And here's the shift. Clarity does not require permission. A healthy boundary doesn't need to convince anyone. The right people don't need your pain translated into paragraphs. They don't need proof. They don't need your exhaustion displayed like evidence. When you realize this, something loosens. You understand that explaining was never about helping others understand you. It was about trying to make yourself safe in their reaction, and safety that depends on someone else's approval is never real safety. The first step isn't to stop explaining overnight. It's simply to notice, to pause. To ask yourself quietly, am I sharing because I want to or because I am afraid of what will happen if I don't? That question alone changes everything, because the moment you see the pattern, you stop judging yourself for it. And when judgment leaves, choice enters. Guilt is a strange companion. It slips into your life quietly, often disguised as concern or responsibility, whispering that you've done something wrong simply for standing up for yourself. When you begin to honor your boundaries, guilt shows up as a subtle weight on your chest, making you question your choices, your intentions, even your worth. It tells you that saying no is selfish, that insisting on your needs is unkind, and that love should never feel inconvenient. And for years you may have believed it. You may have bent yourself into knots to make it disappear, hoping that if you kept apologizing, explaining, and giving in, the guilt would vanish. But here is the truth. Guilt is not the voice of morality or kindness. It is the voice of fear masquerading as care. It's the echo of all the times someone made you feel that your needs were too much, that your desires were too big, that your voice wasn't meant to be heard. And when guilt steps in, it's reminding you of all those old lessons you were taught, lessons about being small, quiet, and accommodating. You notice it in the way you soften your words, the way you preface every decision with an excuse or a justification. You notice it in the way your body tightens when you simply say, I can't, or this isn't okay for me. Guilt makes these simple statements feel like confessions, like admissions of wrongdoing, like something that needs repairing rather than simply existing. And yet, the very act of naming the guilt, of noticing it without judgment, is transformative. Because once you see that guilt is not a verdict but a signal, you begin to respond differently. You begin to recognize that the discomfort it brings is not a reflection of who you are or what you deserve. It is the sign that you are finally choosing yourself, stepping into your own integrity, and daring to exist fully in your truth. The challenge is that discomfort is often mistaken for failure. People feel guilty because they've been trained to fear their own needs, to prioritize harmony over honesty. And when you break that pattern, when you choose your boundaries over approval, guilt arrives like an old friend, pretending to guide you, while really testing whether you are ready to stand firm. The shift happens gradually. You begin to see that letting guilt wash over you without acting on it is a practice of courage. That feeling bad does not mean you have done wrong. That respecting yourself, even when others resist or misunderstand, is not selfish, it is necessary. And slowly you notice something remarkable. The tighter the guilt grips, the closer you are to claiming your power. The more uncomfortable the truth feels, the more liberating it is to simply say, without apology, what you need and what you will allow in your life. In these quiet moments, you start to understand that guilt is not your master. It is a messenger. Its presence reveals exactly where your courage is needed. And when you respond to it with clarity and self-compassion, you begin to feel the first taste of freedom, the kind of freedom that does not require permission, explanation, or validation. You are learning that guilt will always exist in some form, but it no longer controls the narrative. You can feel it, honor it, and let it pass. You can allow yourself to exist fully, unapologetically, and without explanation. And in that space, you find not only relief, but a profound sense of belonging to yourself. Courage does not arrive with fanfare. It does not knock at your door dressed in confidence or perfection. It often appears quietly in the small, uncomfortable spaces where you are forced to stand alone. It shows up the moment you realize that your worth is not dependent on convincing anyone else, the moment you accept that you do not need to justify your choices, your limits, your needs, or your voice. That is when courage whispers, soft but unyielding, you are enough, even if they do not understand. The struggle is real. Fear lingers in the shadows, asking questions designed to keep you small. What if they think you are selfish? What if they stop loving you? What if standing firm means losing someone who matters? And the answers you have carried for years, often from childhood or from a lifetime of compromise, are not simple. They are tangled with the belief that love is conditional and that approval must be earned. Every no feels like a risk, every boundary like a test. But there is a shift when you stop performing your worth for others and begin to claim it for yourself. Silence becomes strength, not because you are avoiding confrontation, but because you recognize that not every reaction requires explanation. You begin to see that over-explaining was never protection for anyone but yourself, and even then it was only partial, temporary. True protection comes from standing firm, from aligning your words and actions with what you know to be right for you, and allowing others to respond as they will. This courage is not always visible to the outside world. In fact, it may look like nothing at all. It may feel invisible, like a quiet confidence humming under your skin as you take a deep breath and speak without preamble. It may feel like a trembling in your chest, a subtle knot in your stomach, but with each act, the trembling fades and the knot loosens. The act itself, the decision to hold the line without explaining, becomes its own proof that you are capable of standing for yourself. And the more you practice, the more you notice a remarkable truth. Boundaries are not meant to be negotiated endlessly. They are declarations of self-respect. They are statements of identity. When you embrace that, when you allow yourself to hold your ground without justification, you feel an internal alignment that is profoundly liberating. You feel lighter because you no longer carry the burden of justifying your existence to anyone else. You begin to notice that respect from others follows naturally when it is offered, but it is no longer the fuel for your courage. Courage grows in repetition. Every time you resist the urge to explain unnecessarily, every time you say what you mean without apology, every time you honor yourself despite discomfort, you are practicing a muscle that has been dormant far too long. And with each practice, the voice of fear diminishes slightly, while the voice of clarity, self-respect, and inner strength grows louder. This is not an overnight transformation. It is a series of small acts that accumulate into a life lived authentically, a life where you no longer measure your worth by how much you can justify it to someone else, where you no longer shrink to avoid discomfort, where you can simply exist with integrity and trust that your voice matters, simply because it belongs to you. Courage, in this sense, is quiet. It is steadfast. It does not demand applause. It only asks for honesty. And when you give yourself that honesty, the world shifts not because everyone changes, but because you have finally changed your relationship with yourself. Change is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the slow shifting of sunlight across a quiet room. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't demand recognition, but once it begins, it touches everything. The moment you stop explaining your boundaries, the way others respond begins to reveal itself. Some will resist, some will test, some will push against what you have carefully and courageously defined. And yet, in that very resistance lies the confirmation that your boundaries are real, meaningful, and necessary. It is natural to fear their reactions. You have been trained, often for a lifetime, to anticipate disapproval, to soften your voice, to rationalize your needs to avoid conflict. You have been taught that harmony matters more than your peace, that pleasing others is safer than standing firm. And now, as change begins to ripple through your relationships, the familiar patterns of fear, doubt, and anxiety rise again. You notice your chest tightening, your throat constricting, the old questions creeping back. Did I go too far? Am I being unreasonable? Will they still love me? And yet, with each act of holding the line without apology, something remarkable begins to happen. You notice that some people who once felt entitled to explanations suddenly step back and adjust their expectations. They begin to respect the limits you have quietly, firmly placed, and others who resist or criticize reveal themselves. In a way that is painful but clarifying. You start to see who values your presence only when it is convenient, and who values you because you are willing to be yourself fully. Change brings clarity. It does not guarantee approval, nor does it shield you from disappointment, but it does show you the truth of your relationships. It exposes what is built on convenience versus what is built on respect, what is flexible versus what is unwavering. And in seeing this truth, you no longer feel compelled to negotiate your worth, explain your boundaries, or apologize for insisting on your needs. You realize that the very act of maintaining your integrity is enough. This stage of change is often uncomfortable. People may push back, ask questions, or express confusion. You may feel moments of guilt or second-guess yourself, wondering if standing firm makes you harsh or unkind. But the deeper understanding is that discomfort is part of the process. Discomfort is not a sign that you are wrong, it is a sign that growth is happening. It is a measure of the distance you are moving from old patterns of people-pleasing toward authentic self-respect. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a shift occurs in your inner world. You begin to feel lighter, freer, and more grounded. The anxiety that once accompanied every interaction diminishes. You no longer measure every conversation against a scale of approval or avoidance of conflict. Instead, you respond with calm clarity. You speak less to convince others and more to honor yourself. You observe their reactions without letting them dictate your peace. In this space, the transformation is profound, not because everyone changes, but because you do. You are no longer negotiating your existence. You are no longer shrinking to meet someone else's comfort. You are no longer seeking permission to be yourself. And in that space, you begin to understand that change is not something you demand from the world. It is something you cultivate within, quietly, steadily, and with courage. And as you continue to hold your boundaries with quiet confidence, the people and situations that are truly meant to be in your life reveal themselves. Respect, understanding, and alignment become natural, not forced. And the sense of peace that arrives in this clarity is unlike anything you have known before. It is the reward for choosing yourself, for trusting yourself, and for allowing change to unfold, not as a battle, but as a quiet, unstoppable unfolding of truth. Growth is quiet, but it is relentless. It does not announce itself with fireworks or applause, and it often goes unnoticed by those around you. It begins deep inside, in the spaces you never thought to notice, the moments when you hold your boundaries without apology, when you choose yourself despite fear, when you allow your voice to exist without qualification. In these moments, something shifts. You begin to feel a trust in yourself that was once missing, a sense of alignment that cannot be shaken by anyone else's opinion or misunderstanding. Self-trust is not something that comes overnight. It is cultivated through countless small decisions, through repeated acts of honesty and consistency. Each time you choose your needs over convenience, each time you resist the urge to explain or justify yourself unnecessarily, you are practicing the muscle of trust. And with every repetition, it grows stronger. You begin to recognize that your worth is inherent, not conditional, that your voice matters simply because it is yours, and that your peace is non-negotiable. The inner struggle never fully disappears. There are still moments when old fears rise up, the fear that asserting yourself will push people away, the fear that standing firm will make you lonely, the fear that your needs are too much. And yet, these fears become less powerful, less convincing, because you have proof that you can withstand discomfort, that you can remain whole even when others resist your boundaries.